How do you do, dear viewers? Labor and personnel practices are one of the frequent subjects that we very often talk about with people overseas because it is one of the important factors that has contributed to the success or sometimes over-success of the Japanese economy. The rapid internationalization of the Japanese society, however, is bound to change that too, because labor and personnel practices are after all very fluid. So today we would like to talk about the labor and personnel practices in Japan more from the viewpoint of the recent trend rather than the traditional stereotyped thinking about it. Our guest today is Mr. Thomas Nevins. Mr. Nevins is the well-known expert in this field. He is the president of TMT Incorporated, which he himself founded in 1978. He is a very aggressive businessman. I very respect him for that, and he is also a practicing scholar. He has authored many books in the field of labor laws and practices, both in Japan and the United States. The most recent one is this one, titled Labor Pains and the Gaijin Boss. Mr. Nevins, it's nice to have you in this program.
All right, nice being here, Mr. Komatsu.
Would you briefly tell us about how you got into this area in the beginning?
Okay, it was basically by accident. When I was 20 years old, I was figuring out what to do with a summer vacation, and some of my friends said to me, you know, why don't you go to India? So I did that, and then a professor at Cornell, I was studying labor relations at Cornell University, she said, why don't you go to Japan and do a labor relations project for me or with me, do research together. And I'd already been studying labor relations in college, and so I came to Japan that year, and then I studied Japanese at the university. And then I came back when I was 22, sponsored by the Japan Institute of Labor. And I gradually started working in labor unions and in companies, and then did quite a lot of translating and did some odd jobs, my share of odd jobs as well, and did some work for the ILO, for example, and translated for labor unions. And then began this company in 1978.
Now, what do you do in this TMT?
Our clients are multinational firms here.
Foreign capital companies?
Yes, yes, foreign capital companies, and we help them with their setups, for example, set up their rules of employment and their compensation and benefit practice packages. And we also handle such difficult problem areas as terminations and staff reductions when the company isn't doing so well. And we handle cost-saving programs, and also union relations, as well as other staff relations in general, trying to make sure that they can manage the Japanese well and effectively, and giving them the answers that they need, and really giving them the sort of practical advice and plotting the strategy and actually getting them where they need to be. So it goes much beyond, you know, a theory and a knowledge of practice, but a lot is based on practical nuts and bolts experience that the firm has developed over the years.
Well, now when those multinationals or the foreign capital companies try to establish themselves in Japan, they also have to know the labor practices and labor situation in Japan. And what do you think are some of the special characteristics of the Japanese labor management relations that they have to know?
Well, I think they should always know exactly what Japanese companies have traditionally known and practiced. For example, they should know that there is a summer and a winter bonus, And they should be able to have a choice or an option as to whether or not they and their employees want to have a summer and winter bonus. They should know that a traditional Japanese company and many of the multinationals will pay family allowances and housing allowances, and they will have position allowances, you know, the yakuzuki tate for kachos and buchos. They don't necessarily have to be involved with those practices, however. It may not be so necessary. And after all, one reason for having such allowances is that they represent non-pensionable salary. So their presence helps to control the weight of pensionable income or the retirement liability that a company must pay on an employee.
So those foreign managers usually like those Japanese payment systems?
Well, they perhaps, for example, on reading my book, they may be predisposed to believing that they should have them. And there are some areas in the book which is based on seminars that I've run, for example. It's a compilation of articles which have been published in America and in Japan over the years. And there are some strong positions in there for Japanizing a compensation package. But as we get more and more experience, we see that as long as a multinational firm is safe in terms of, say, the weight of non-pensionable income by having just a simple concept such as a percentage of non-pensionable income, instead of having all those non-pensionable allowances, or introducing a daini kyuyo of just a non-pensionable salary component, then they're safe and they don't necessarily need some of those other allowances. But I think it's important if the employees decide themselves in the firm that they don't want the summer and the winter bonus and instead they want annual income divided by 12, and they feel that they don't want family and housing allowances, which incidentally are quite risky now. They're quite a dangerous thing to get into after the April 1st legislation this year, which provides that you have to give equal treatment for the head of a household, regardless of, you know, whether it's a male or a female, and so on, and provide those allowances.
Are there companies, I mean multinationals, who would rather continue to use their own practices at home rather than adapting to the Japanese practice?
That is often the reaction that they have. And then when they talk with me and they see that, you know, maybe those some of the Japanese aspects of a compensation package are not necessary, although I do recommend that they pay summer and winter bonuses. For one reason, the social insurance contributions are smaller on bonus than they are on normal monthly pay. And also there's room for flexibility because you can have a performance range on a summer and winter bonus. And if the firm doesn't perform so well, it helps to have that bonus. It provides flexibility. So I will recommend that they have that, but sometimes they are relieved to hear that some of these other more complicated allowances really are not as necessary as they might have perceived that they are.
So those, some of those typical Japanese labor or the personnel practices such as bonus is advantageous to the companies from the manager's viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So, so that they can be probably transplanted in the foreign soils too. Is that how they perceive it?
In fact, you know, we had a JETRO book, which was published by JETRO in 1980, which was about American labor relations for Japanese companies. And Japanese companies bought that book to help them with their labor relations on the American side. And in that book, I recommended that Japanese companies should not forget their roots, should not forget that they came from Japan and that there were many things they were doing in Japan which were extremely successful from both a macroeconomic point of view in terms of allowing the country to have a higher savings rate because so much of the summer and winter bonus can go into savings. From the employee's point of view, in that he gets accustomed to a certain standard of living with his monthly pay, and with his summer and winter bonus he can save that and he can buy consumer durables such as refrigerators or automobiles. And essentially, I think what you always have to do is not just follow Japanese practice blindly, and Japanese going into America should not follow American practice blindly, or American companies, when they look at Japanese practice now and they're studying many, many books and so on, they should try and even integrate some of those concepts into America. For example, one of the problems that Japanese companies have when they go into the United States or in other countries, they complain that the turnover rate is very high among the employees, that the employees quit too soon. Mm-hmm. And they put investment into training, which is a great strength of Japanese industry and is something that large firms can do here because of lifetime employment and because they can get their money back on their investment. But when they do that in the United States, the people quit. Now, if you have a bonus and you tell a man, it's called golden handcuffs now. They have a little word in America, golden handcuffs. It's a deferred income concept, such that if you stay in your job for a certain period of time, you'll have deferred income and it will be paid at the end, which is really what the Japanese bonus is like to a large extent. So
now,
it would be
those
helpful.
practices that you mentioned, that bonuses and allowances, are, however, key to the more basic personal practices as lifelong employment or the seniority-based salary system. And these things, I think, are gradually changing too, as a result of the changes of the Japanese economic situation and so forth. And then that will also have the effect of changing those payment practices also. Don't you think that kind of changes in the basic trend is taking place?
Sure. I guess some of the changes taking place in Japan, above all else, the workforce is aging. And that means that there are not enough kacho positions, for example, let alone bucho positions, for Japanese managers to take. And it's very rare, it will become more and more rare for a man to be able to get a line management position. So that means that people's work will not be so interesting. They'll be put over in the side into specialist roles, which may or may not be interesting, and people will begin to look to the outside. And their firms, in fact, are and have been, to some extent, pushing older employees out. In fact, one of the characteristics, more unpleasant characteristics perhaps of Japanese management, is that there's really even a concept of first hired, first fired. So although there is something called seniority wages, in reality, on a staff reduction, a jin sakugen type reduction where you get rid of employees, older employees are asked to leave first. Whereas in the United States and in America, both by unions or even in non-union situations, to prevent unionization, they will always make sure that they have the greatest loyalty and commitment to the older employees, and they manage to maintain their jobs. But the Japanese approach is excellent from management's point of view because, in fact, the oldest employees have the most expensive salaries. And if you can get them out of the firm, they're the least flexible in adapting to technology. If you can get them out, there's a tremendous savings there. Now, basically, the closed labor market is really the secret to Japan's success. It hasn't really been stated that way.
What do you mean by the closed labor market?
It's usually said the three pillars, they say, of Japanese labor relations: lifetime employment, seniority wages, enterprise unions. But the reason why a Japanese employee, up until recently, generally stayed in one of those large firms was because there was no mid-career hiring in an equally large firm which would pay him the higher salaries, because small companies don't pay as well in Japan, and would also guarantee him a job. The job could be guaranteed because of the contract employment in the second tier of the Japanese economy, or because of subsidiaries and so on.
But that situation is changing because, as you mentioned, because of the increasing number of aged workers, and also because of the increasing number of foreign companies doing business in Japan, providing opportunity to
They are
Japanese
providing,
people.
indeed, they're providing, very exciting opportunities.
It's much easier these days to change jobs for the Japanese.
That's right. But still, a great characteristic of Japanese recruiting and manpower planning is the April 1st shinsotsu, the entry of the new graduate. And this is very important, and it's a great strength, and it's something that Japan should not easily eliminate. And in fact, everyone joins not only the company on April 1st, but they also join the union, regardless of whether they're white-collar employees with a tie and jacket. In America, employees like that do not join a labor union, and they're never paid overtime. Whereas in Japan, in a large firm, all employees are paid overtime, for example, and are in the same labor union as the blue-collar workers. So this is really, to a large extent, a company union rather than a trade union in a Western sense. And that's also been a great strength to Japan, because to a large extent the union is an appendage of the personnel department. And we know that often the union leader often becomes personnel manager and so on. Right?
Well, this practice of hiring young people on April the 1st at one time, and those people will remain with the company for long, I guess is also changing, because many of those young people are getting impatient about the slow pace of promotion.
Yes.
And when they see that many job opportunities are available outside, I guess they don't want to stay in the company as long as their elders used to.
That's right. There's a lot of truth in that. Plus, they just look at the percentages. They look at the possibilities of getting on the board of directors. You know, that was a traditional carrot that many people would work very hard for. And as you got older, it would become more and more clear that you would not be able to reach that kind of a position. And then in Japan, even in the past, older workers became comparatively less motivated. And I think that sort of thing will be happening more and more. And then Japan, it's always been changing very fast, and I would not say that it's going to change any faster, but certainly certain markets, such as financial markets, are changing dramatically quickly in Japan. And even your traditional trust banks in Japan, you know, your Japanese trust banks have gone out with newspaper ads to bring in mid-career hires, for example. Yeah. That happened a few months ago.
Yeah, that's a market change too.
Right.
I'd like to ask you, what kind of people those foreign companies look for? Are they the same type of people that the Japanese companies value, or are they a different kind of people that those foreign capital companies look for?
Well, I think that basically they're the same types of people. They may not, they may be wrong about what they're looking for, but what they should be looking for are people who can do good work. Mm-hmm. So we also have a very large executive search business now. In fact, that's become our main area of activity, and I guess we have about, at this point, 17 headhunters now in the firm. Mm-hmm. And in one sense, headhunting in Japan is quite easy, because if you identify a man who is a line manager in a major Japanese firm, and if he's never changed jobs, and if he is in fact, you know, a kacho, a bucho, a jicho with line responsibility, you don't even have to really test his references. You know that he's a very good, solid man, and it makes it quite easy.
So whoever is good in Japanese company is also good in foreign
company? He generally is. He generally is. Now, one thing that is often necessary at a high management level, like a bucho level, is English. So that's something we must find. But there are so many Japanese now in Japanese firms who speak English, and their quality of English is just as good or better than the quality of the English of Japanese and foreign firms. There's no difference now. Japan has become that nationalized, internationalized.
How about this loyalty thing? The Japanese company tend to value loyalty above other factors, above other ingredients in a personnel talent. How about the foreign capital companies? They do the same?
Loyalty is indeed valued, and I think it will be valued more and more as we reach some excesses in terms of people turning over jobs, especially in some of the financial markets. It's quite ridiculous now, but in a few years there'll be so much change that I think people will become tired of it, and loyalty will be valued. You know, in fact, my father, for example, worked in one company for some 37 years, and that's quite typical. So you read a lot of articles in American magazines and newspapers about someone at a very high executive level moving from one firm into another, and it's quite shocking to the Japanese. But in fact, you know, the great majority of Americans are not moving and changing jobs as quickly. And even in Japan, there's a lot of job change among the lower sector of the economy, the smaller firms, where they're not able to hire people and to make a commitment on April 1st to people, and where they have to hire a man to do a job somewhere during the year. And there, the employment patterns and the labor relations in those firms is not that unlike the employment practices and compensation practices in America. There's a large distinction, I think, in Japan between the top firms that have some of the traditional practices and some of the smaller ones.
Mm-hmm. Do you think this Japanese are becoming less loyal these days as a result of this sort of increased availability of jobs or the increased mobility in the labor market?
Yes, you know, loyalty is something that loyalty, I think, as we use the word, it's a symbol which represents a lack of job change. But that's about all there is. When it becomes possible to change jobs, then we have to say that there's more job changing, which means that there's less loyalty. But I wonder if people were really ever that loyal, as much as it was that there were no other good opportunities in an equally prestigious firm. And now they're willing to trade off a more rational lifestyle being able to spend more time with their children, with their families, having more control on their work, having to play less political games in the workshop, and have a richer personal life. And this is something that even wives, I think, will learn to enjoy. And as more people do it, and then Japanese are not so confused or upset or embarrassed by showing a meishi, which has a name of a company that people are not familiar with. Although even these multinationals in Japan, they may be small in Japan, but some of them obviously are very large, but they're very large throughout the world, and there are a lot of opportunities, good opportunities there.
So in that respect, you say that Japanese are the same as human being, not very particular from the viewpoint of reality also. And I think you know both sides of the ocean, I should say. And how would you compare Japanese as a labor force?
Oh, they're good. They're definitely good. I mean, you can watch a Japanese, at a McDonald's or in a cabaret or any place. The waiter there, the way he moves, with the pride that he takes, and this sort of thing is really excellent. I mean, Japanese are definitely highly disciplined employees, and that's especially true in Japanese firms where they see directions and instructions and guidance coming within sort of a guise of legitimatized authority. Now, sometimes that breaks down a little bit when they work in foreign firms, but maybe that's all right too, because they have some other tensions that they have to deal with.
Do you think these things will stick? The Japanese will continue to be good quality workers?
Yeah, but I think that it's comparative. I know that just last night I was at a restaurant with a Japanese who has been in and out of Japan over the last few years. He comes in once every 2 years or so, and he lives basically in America. And he said that he's noticed, and then when he's here, he stays for maybe 1 or 2 months, and he goes to restaurants every night. And he says that he's noticed gradually service has been going down in Japanese restaurants. And it's simply a product, I think, of prosperity. Some of the things that were deemed to be very important and critical in life become a little bit less important. And the Japanese travel more, and they see how people work, and they see how they're served in restaurants abroad, and they loosen up a little bit, and they relax a little bit. And
so do you mean to say that it is poverty that is behind this high quality of the Japanese as a labor force? Or is there any other factors?
That wouldn't be accurate either, would it? Because if you go to various underdeveloped countries, the service is not at all good, is it? So it's much more than poverty. But I think it's authority, and to a large extent, I think it comes up out of the school systems, and probably no, the word cannot be poverty, because you don't have that sort of discipline, and that very crisp approach to your job and responsibility in underdeveloped countries. It can't be poverty, and it's not going to change that quickly. And a good businessman who's managing a good business and is watching out for these things can continue to keep his workforce, I think, doing a good job.
So you think it is well bred in the Japanese society, and it will not change readily?
Not that quickly, yeah. We're talking about change here, but everything is comparative, right? Compared to other countries outside Japan, Japan will still continue to be doing just fine, the discipline will be there, and I think they'll be very careful not to throw the baby out with the wash water in terms of maintaining some of their good practices that they've carried out over the years. Of course, so many of these traditional aspects of Japanese labor relations are really post-war phenomena anyway. For example, the enterprise union, the union organization rate before the war, the highest point was only 7%. And then after the war, within just 1 year, in 1946, it went to its highest peak of 39.5%. The main reason was it was externally exposed by MacArthur, because MacArthur, part of occupation policy was to have labor unions, and he said, you will have labor unions. No one was about to oppose that. So the easiest place to organize was in the company, say the company cafeteria on the company land. There was no opposition, and so what you had was overnight you had an enterprise union. And it didn't go through that baptism of fire, so it's rather a union which understands management's needs very well.
So for those multinationals, they have good, high-quality Japanese people as their employees, and they have rather advantageous management practices which they can adapt from the Japanese tradition. So, relatively speaking, it is easy for them to have a good performance in Japan.
It's not that easy because one of the problems that a multinational has is that the top management changes. I mean, it is necessary for someone from that country to manage an enterprise. I think that that's very important. But when you have top management changing every few years, there are changes in policies, for example, and the roots are not here to the same extent that a large Japanese firm will have them in terms of subsidiaries and the ability to, hire people on contract or to farm people out into subsidiaries. And you have to have very good backup and sales support on your product. So it still is not that easy, but if they work hard and if they do their job right, they can be very successful.
After all, what they aim at is the optimum blend of the Japanese practices, good Japanese labor force, and some good, interesting Western practices.
Yes.
Mix them together in an optimum way. That should be the success formula. So we only have 1 minute to go. So would you say what would be the best blend of two practices to be successful in the Japanese, in Japan, for MNCs?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. The best blend. I would say to always use your common sense. You must not believe that it's the same as it is, say, in the United States or in Europe, but you also shouldn't believe that everything is different. You should believe that if you know how to do it and you do it in the right way, you can achieve whatever you want to achieve, okay? But you just have to sometimes do it differently. So it's important not to feel that everything is different, but also not to feel that everything is the same, and to look at what you've done in other countries and see what was successful about it, and to look at what the Japanese are doing. And then I think it's probably also helpful to call a good labor consultant and to get some more advice.
Mm-hmm. So use your common sense.
Yes, I think common sense is important. Right?
Thank you very much. That's very interesting, Mr. Nevins.
Thank you.